The best way I can describe it is Gabby seemed like she was at her breaking point.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. So that was Nina, Angelo and Matthew England speaking on 60 Minutes Australia, and I'll put a link to that in the description. We will be coming back to what they said about the incident at the Merry Piglets, the Tex-Mex restaurant, on August 27th. In Australia's Herald Sun newspaper, I'll also put a link to that article dealing with Nina Angelo's statement. I think it is syndicating something from ABC News. She says that Brian Laundrie was actually screaming at the hostess and that Gabby was in tears and apologizing for his behavior. And this is quoting from what she said. She said, it looked as though they were almost getting kicked out, actually getting kicked out of the restaurant. Now, one doesn't know whether it was being upset about the bill. The staff haven't really been completely open about what has happened, adding yet another layer of mystery and intrigue to this. I mean, of course, the staff would have known exactly what the argument was about because they were the ones arguing or, at the receiving end of Brian Laundrie's sort of tirade kind of thing. And the interesting thing is, Nina says, the witness said that Gabby kind of abruptly left the restaurant. So she kind of left abruptly first, crying, and then Brian seemed kind of really upset, really angry, and then he came back in a couple of times, and then she apologized after him. And so, although I'm sure many of you are aware of all of these details, the real question is, what was the thing that actually triggered the events that followed? In other words, what happened after this, after they left the restaurant on August 27th? What exactly triggered Brian? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started.
His demeanor, he was angry and it was temperamental and it was rude. It's just, and it was enough to make me feel uncomfortable. And I told Matt, my exact words were, he's creeping me out. The best way I can describe it is Gabby seemed like she was at her breaking point.
So that once again is a clip from 60 Minutes Australia. I'll put the full 18-minute, 40-second clip, link to the clip in the description. But although it is fairly detailed, it sort of comes across as garbled, meaning yes, it was a very emotional encounter. Yes, Brian was angry. But what was it really about? Without knowing that context, we can't really direct ourselves in any particular area in terms of the psychology, in terms of the dynamics. You just kind of get a sense that there was displeasure, frustration, conflict, anger on August 27th with Gabby and Brian. But you don't really get a clear sense from these witnesses exactly what it was based on. What were they angry about? Were they justified? Was Gabby angry too? Now, interestingly, there is a way that we can kind of poke at the psychology, poke at the dynamics without actually knowing what those details are. So the run-up of incidents prior to Gabby's murder do unfortunately show the telltale signs of domestic abuse. Any person with self-esteem issues is going to be triggered by someone undermining him. It's important to note that Gabby Petito didn't undermine Brian during the Moab incident. She could have. She could have criticized him, blamed him. And if you think also, all of their social media was about edifying themselves and one another. So the whole purpose of them being there was to sort of build themselves up, including in a sort of a social media sense and kind of indirectly in a social sense. And so what I want to try and show you is that what she did at the Merry Piglets, going in afterwards after he'd furiously U-turned 4 times, he apparently went back inside 4 separate times. What that effectively is, and maybe how he interpreted it, how he saw it, was her undermining him. Bear in mind, she's going in not to also vent at the staff. She's going in to apologize for what he's doing, or what he's done, what he's said, his behavior. And he may see that as undermining him. He feels he's got righteous anger, and she's going in saying, I'm sorry about that. So she's effectively disagreeing with him in public. Now, I have actually spoken in the past about how the social media could have made him feel undermined, looking at, even right now, his Instagram following and hers, what they're saying about him on Instagram compared to hers. We don't know really what was said at the time in real time, because it seems like that has been edited and deleted out. We also don't know what Brian said about some of Gabby's posts and vice versa, because it seems a lot of that has been edited out as well. I have heard, I can't confirm this really because I haven't seen it, but I have heard that Brian was occasionally mean to Gabby on her Instagram. So, if you've got any instances of that, I'd be interested to see that. But that is also undermining. We all know what it feels like when you put something on social media and someone close to you criticizes you on social media. It's totally different to being criticized directly or personally. When it's done in that space, it's almost like public criticism. It's the online version of what happened at the Tex-Mex restaurant, right? Now, think about the word undermine. What does it mean? Well, it means to subvert or weaken. It means to weaken or ruin by degrees. It means to excavate the earth beneath. And if you imagine the literal meaning of the word undermine, it's like someone standing on the ground and then someone digging away the earth almost beneath their feet. In other words, they are almost creating a scenario, an untenable scenario where the ground they're standing on may actually collapse under them because they've been undermined, right? Another way of looking at the word is that it means to wash away supporting material. And think about Brian at the Merry Piglets saying, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that? Who on earth do you think you are? Whatever he was using to back up his argument, right? He's probably rationalizing and justifying why he was angry. And then Gabby going in there afterwards and apologizing is like washing away his supporting material in that sense. Undermine can also mean sabotage, subvert, compromise, disable, cripple, sap in the sense of sapping away energy, also enfeeble. And so I was looking at this word undermine and I was trying to get a visceral sense of what it would feel like if you were in Brian's shoes. I'm talking about where you have this murderous anger, that you are triggered not just a little bit, but totally you almost like want to burst out of it's almost like you've had a really, really extreme electric shock, right? And you're bursting at the seams out of your own skin. What is going to make that happen? What is going to take you from sort of normal to totally crazed in a moment? And so I sort of went online and I found another definition where they say it's to damage or weaken, especially gradually or insidiously. And, you can think of undermining can be something that feels like it happens over a long period of time. And the question is that what Brian experienced? I'm not saying it was happening, but is that what he thought was happening in terms of Gabby's social media, that he's being undermined over a long period of time by that? And then what's really interesting in the sample that I found, they provide a sample sentence of undermining, and this was it. Quote, his lack of confidence made him believe everything being said was meant to undermine him, end quote. It's that old joke where the people the people are playing a sports game and they huddle together and somebody thinks, I wonder what they're saying about me. It's absolute paranoia kind of thing. Or if somebody laughs, are they laughing at me? So, undermining is seldom a huge deal if you've got a strong sense of self, solid self-esteem, and a healthy confidence. Another word for that is healthy narcissism. Undermining, and parents of teenagers know this all too well, that undermining can be huge triggers for someone who's already insecure or inadequate in themselves, right? someone you undermine in the slightest way can completely overreact, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to develop their character armor, and you are dismantling it, right? Of course, if the armor's already in place, it's not going to bother them. So a young person is kind of by definition preoccupied with the project of building their characters, a process that can feel like building so many sandcastles on a beach and being constantly undermined by the winds, tides, and waves of change. Folks on social media know what one undermining comment can do to a fragile ego. It comes crashing down like a house of cards. Now, I hate to use myself as an example of what undermining feels like in action, even as an apparently mature adult. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share with you a short anecdote. And the point isn't to sort of get your attention or direct attention towards me, or even to put this up for discussion, really. I don't really want to deal with the whole thing of was I right or wrong. What I want you to do is see, put yourself in my position, but I'm going to take you through it in a little bit of detail. And what I want you to see is how quickly you feel a sense of anger and indignation as you follow in the footsteps through these incidents that I had with a dog. So it's not even a really critical, important thing that's taking place. But because I was undermined, I was shocked myself how quickly I went from just walking along to being incredibly angry. And so when I share this, I want you to think about it within the context of these dynamics, how the psychology plays out with any person, and how it probably played out at that restaurant. Because it's one thing to intellectually know what happened, it's another thing to feel it, to experience it, to have a sense of it in a real way, in an authentic way. So here goes. A couple of days ago, I took my dog Timmy for a walk. He's a small miniature schnauzer, about a year and a half old. It was quite late in the afternoon, and as usual, Timmy took off, running across the field towards another dog. I was some distance away, but could see 3 people standing around Timmy and the other dog. The Alsatian he was playing with is very boisterous, also a puppy, slightly bigger than Timmy, but younger, about 6 months younger. When I was about 10 meters away, the owner of the Alsatian advanced on Timmy and struck him with a leash, shouting something like, "Behave." And I was immediately indignant, because if anything, his dog was just as playful as mine, but he somehow chose to see Timmy as the bad dog in the situation. And so I said fairly calmly, but in a firm voice, "Hey, don't hit my dog." And a younger guy who I think coaches cricket was sitting kind of right there. And the 3 of them had kind of been, I guess, talking. And then I walked by into the situation, and he responded to what I just said by saying, "You know what, I think your dog needs to be disciplined." And you know what that felt like? It felt like I was being undermined in what I was saying to this old guy. And so I also said, I think I know my dog better than you do. And there's a little bit more to say about that, but I don't want to go into too much detail. But anyway, at that point, the old man hit Timmy a second time. Now, it wasn't as though, it's a really old guy. He's maybe, I think he's way beyond 70, but quite an old guy. It's not as though it was a very hard blow. Timmy didn't even make a sound. It was a fairly ineffectual hit, but it was nevertheless him hitting Timmy with his dog's leash. And my blood was boiling, but I also wanted to avoid an incident. It wasn't just this old guy. There were these 2 other younger guys standing around, one of which seemed to be supportive, kind of thing. And I was there for a walk. I don't want to have a big argument. And so what I did was I just headed off in a different direction. I was actually thinking about another incident that had happened on a beach a couple of weeks earlier, that it was even worse than that. And I think that was also riling me up, that, people behaving like this in a unnecessarily aggressive way to a harmless little dog. And my dog's actually smaller than his dog. Anyway, so I did want to talk to the old guy, but I decided to do so one-on-one. I'd seen him before. I thought if I see him again, I'll just sort of, approach him and speak to him. And so, as I say, with three guys, one of which had undermined me right there, I didn't think it was really the right time. Even so, I was extremely upset by this, and fortunately, immediately after that, I ran into some friends. I'm getting a sense of moral support almost immediately. And then a similar scenario played out with their dogs. They also had a Rottweiler puppy, this time also younger than Timmy, but a lot bigger. And so Timmy was making the same noises. There was the same boisterous play going on. And you'd really have to see the interaction to understand what was going on. If you didn't know the dogs, you might be quite concerned. And they knew my dog, I knew their dog, and we sort of let them sort of do their playful wrestling. It's a male and a female kind of going at it in a sort of a playful way. But if you're not familiar with that, you might not know. So I actually asked these friends of mine, do you want me to put Timmy on a leash because maybe you feel that he's, doing something to their dog? And the guy said, no, it's not necessary. Anyway, long story short, when I returned a few minutes later onto the same field, that dude that had undermined me was just driving off. And as I was walking, I thought, if our paths sort of cross, if he slows down or whatever, I'm going to confront him. I'm actually going to talk to him. So if he'd driven a little bit slower, and perhaps if he'd been a little closer, I probably would have stopped and just said, hey, whatever. Anyway, then the next day, the same incident with the same old man and the same dog repeated itself. I was with a similar group of people this time, a little bit bigger group, all of us with dogs, maybe twice as many people and dogs as during the first incident. Once again, I told the dude to stop hitting my dog. Once again, it wasn't like he was lashing him. It wasn't, Timmy didn't even make a sound when it happened. But it was sufficient for me to actually mumble under my breath to the people standing close to me that I actually planned to confront this guy, that I was going to talk to him now. And all three of them turned to me and they said they agreed that it wasn't right what was happening, right? And so what I did notice was this old guy was probably walking with his son, and it looked like his wife as well. And so I was kind of waiting for the right moment where I could sort of take him aside and just speak to him without drama, but just communicate to him that what he was doing I wasn't going to let that happen again. And so while I was sort of waiting for the sort of flow of people to disperse a little bit, I did sort of think, well, maybe my dog does need some discipline. Even so, it should come from me, if it comes from anyone. And so this guy is kind of undermining me and undermining, what's going on with my dog. And you might laugh at that, but that is nevertheless how I felt. And so I was still standing there thinking about the situation when him and his son wandered off. And then his wife slowly, kind of stepping kind of between some of the people that were standing around me, quietly approached me, and she apologized on behalf of her husband. I think she'd heard that I'd said something that I'm going to talk to him. She also, I think, saw the look in my eye, and she said that he's got a particular condition, which I don't think is really an excuse, but she urged me not to confront him and, in her words, make it worse. I thanked her for the apology. I felt quite validated by the apology, but I also resolved that I was going to have a firm word with him when I do, because I've seen him many times, when I do see him in future. But I felt seriously undermined by someone who'd not only ignored me twice, but also by that other youngster the previous day who seemed to have spurred him on the very first night. So I'm sharing this with you not because I want or need some sort of vindication or validation or reinforcement from you guys. I'm trying to show how even if you're a law-abiding citizen, an honest, let's say hopefully fairly stable person, being undermined, even if it is directed toward your dog, is something that can move one to blows almost immediately. You can feel like in that, it just felt so brazen and unnecessary and unacceptable. and that is how quickly you can be triggered, right? I went from being cerebral on a nice walk to infuriated in the twinkle of an eye. And obviously I ended up being passive and inert, almost pathetically so, in terms of coming to Timmy's defense. I think a younger me may have jumped in, with both feet. An older me, I just don't like drama. I'm not afraid to confront someone, but I don't really like it to be dramatic, because you bump into the guy again and you've created this big scene and the grudges and all that kind of thing. So imagine someone who has punched someone before, someone who's been punched, whose blood is up, someone who has this whole social media shit show overshadowing them, plus the Moab incident. And then something happens at a Tex-Mex restaurant. So if you imagine the same thing that happened to me with Timmy, except this is now the 5th or the 6th or the 8th time that he's, hitting my dog. You can imagine you can completely lose it at that point, especially if you've been holding yourself back before then. Does that make sense? And so I think that is what was happening with Brian, that in various ways he was being undermined. He was being undermined, in the sense that perhaps he was living with his parents and he was being told what to do. Perhaps because he didn't have a job and he needed money from Gabby, that would feel like being undermined. But I think the main way he felt he was being undermined was by social media and by how he was being exposed socially as perhaps not a good match for Gabby. And on social media right now, people are leaving pretty insulting comments saying that you're not very good looking. How long is she going to stay with this baldy and all sorts of things like that. You can imagine things like that were possibly happening in real time, and he didn't like it. It's probably not a very nice thing to say, but one of the ways you can tell how good looking a person is by looking at their siblings. I can't often gauge whether a guy is good looking. Like, to me, I'd say, well, I don't think he's really good looking, and a woman or someone else attracted to men would say, no, he's really good looking. But I think one way to do that is to look at, for example, their sister. And if you compare Cassie's looks, for example, to Gabby, I think there's a bit of a difference there. There's a bit of a difference in the type of appearance Gabby has and Cassie, right? So if we go back to what happens at the Tex-Mex restaurant, within this powder keg of feeling undermined, and perhaps even Brian is sort of secretly aware or privately aware that, she's too good for him, or is he good enough for her? And, this constant, continuous sense of undermining, am I good enough for this girl, right? And then something happens at this Tex-Mex restaurant, and within this power keg, Gabby, as he experiences it, undermines him. She kind of manifests that thing that he fears in this horrible little drama that plays out right in front of him. He sees her leave him and go and speak to strangers, apologizing for his behavior, telling the staff, sorry about my boyfriend, he has a temper, I'm sorry he was rude, I'm sorry about this, whatever, or sorry he was out of line. And so then when Gabby is alone with Brian again after that, isn't there going to be hell to pay? Because she's now dismantled his house of cards. He's felt the carpet pulled out from under him. He's been undermined. He's feeling the ground collapsing under his feet. If Brian was undermined, his position as Gabby's driver and photographer would suddenly be revealed for what it is, and he would be revealed for what he had become in her eyes. Trivial. Ernest Becker says, necessity with the illusion of meaning would be the highest achievement for man, but when it becomes trivial, there is no sense to one's life. And maybe he started feeling he's actually not that important in her life, and it made him angry because he was doing so much. He was driving, he was putting himself at her disposal eventually, and now he wanted to turn the tables. And I think when something snapped in him, if that is what happened, it was because their relationship was already so tenuous. For some reason, he wanted to silence her forever, because if he didn't, he'd be undermined even further. He'd be undermined by her story about him, right, going forward. And he'd reached that point where I can't be undermined anymore. So if she'd started undermining him at the Merry Piglets, what would she do after he'd struck her? And this time she might throw him under the bus to the cops, not give him a pass like she did during the Moab incident. And that was still very fresh in his memory, this relief at this lucky escape, how he was hanging on there by a very thin thread. In a weird way, he was at Gabby's mercy. It was a thread that she could have cut if she decided to. So why not cut her thread instead before he did it to her, if that's what was on the cards? If this was his psychology, it shows just how neurotic he was and is, and also how Gabby played into that neurosis too, through the course and through the arc of their dramatic, temperamental, explosive relationship. Neurosis then will be the topic of further analysis of Brian's psychology. All right, I'm not going to take it further than that. We are trying to get to know Brian better, and at the same time we also need to get to know Gabby better. So my next video will be dealing with Gabby, trying to get to know her better through her handwriting. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.